Welcome to Old Sessions House. This is a place that has a great storytelling heritage. It's where Charles Dickens wrote Oliver Twist when he was a legal reporter. So you're in a long line of celebrity talent. Delighted to have Will here. I'll talk about you in a second. My name is Nick Perrett. I'm the founder and CEO of Prosper. Normally I say Prosper is an investment platform, but actually, which it is. But we actually started because I was feeling like I was being ripped off by all of this. I sort of thought that the finance industry looked a bit dodgy, looked like there were fees that they were stealing from me. And then I read this fantastic book called Where Are All the Customers' Yachts?, which was basically written about 100 years ago. And it was a comment on all the people who have all the money are the people who work with your money. So doesn't that tell you something about what's going on? So Prosper is a much more generous business that's trying to maximize the wealth for all of us in the room. That's what we do. Why we do these events? Really two reasons. One, if you are looking to build your wealth over a long time horizon, then one of the things that you need to do is understand the future. So quite often we'll invite people to talk about what are the things that are impacting on humanity for the next 20 years, things like artificial intelligence, for example. But the other reason we do it is that I want to give people an opportunity to better understand themselves. Why do I want to do that? Because one of the biggest reasons that people lose money, in fact, you've got a great story in this book about incinerating money, is our own behaviour. So understanding ourselves and who we are is a really important part of the journey. I'm really excited to have Will. So Will has written 6 books. Does that put you in prolific? Does that make you a prolific author?
Bordering, maybe.
Sunday Times bestselling author, no less. And as you can tell from the sartorial elegance, he used to also be a journalist writing for Esquire and GQ. But for the last 10 years or so, storytelling's been your thing. And this, obviously, if you've been thinking about it for as long as you've been thinking about it, I'm sure that we're all going to learn something. First question, the title of the book, A Story is a Deal. Can you tell us what you mean by the word deal? And you've been thinking about this for a long time. So was that based on an insight or some revelation, or is it just sort of built your understanding over time?
Yeah, it's based on an insight, really. So, you know, we've evolved to be this storytelling animal. We understand ourselves and how the world works through stories, and we've been doing that for tens of thousands of years. And, you know, one of the most important things stories does is it tells us who to be. And so, you know, it's most obvious when you think about children's stories. You know, when we're sort of growing up, when we're kids, our parents and our teachers are trying to turn us into the right kind of person. And they do that with storytelling. And subconsciously, stories make a deal with us. They say, if you behave like a hero, the hero in this story, you're going to get your rewards. And if you behave like a villain, you're going to get punished like a villain does. And so that's the deal. So stories always making a deal with their identity. And the only thing that really changes is the stories get more complex and more real as we get older, as we get more literary. But story is always making that kind of deal with us. It's always got that subconscious information that's telling us who we ought to be and who we ought not to be. So that's what I mean when I say a story is a deal. And that's especially true in marketing and leadership. You know, that's especially true.
And you talk about, when we chatted yesterday, you're like, there's 2 big ideas. We're going to cover a lot of things, but one of the big ideas is around story as it informs your identity.
Yeah.
And a sort of a subconscious need for connection with other people. Some stories, that's bleedingly obvious. So if a religious story is cutting to the heart of, I don't really understand the mystery of life, why am I here, and all of that, and it has appeal. But when you move on to the business side, you know, and you talk a lot in the book about Apple, which is an obvious example of a brand whose narrative is obviously connected with an audience, or there's Nike and other ones like that. What is it from your studying of story? What is it that those brands have got right where others have failed?
Well, again, it's the same thing. They're making a deal with your identity. They understand who their audience is. What is their audience's definition of a hero? What is their audience's definition of a high-status person? Who do I want to be? And they're just reflecting it back at them. So that's what Apple used to be, under Steve Jobs, used to be brilliant at. If you think about the Think Different campaign, there's no information in Think Different about any product. There's not a product shown, there's not a product described, there's no price, there's no specs, there's nothing. It's just a picture of Gandhi, Mother Teresa, John Lennon, creative world breakers. And it's basically saying, if you see yourself, if you have the identity as a creative rule breaker, world maker, then you should buy Apple products. And guess what? It was a massively successful campaign. Same with Nike, and it's using Michael Jordan. And it's like, if you want to, if you're a sportswear person, there's a high probability that your heroes are athletic sports heroes. So reflect that back to them. You make a deal with a subconscious deal with their identity, and it's not really about connections as much as status. It's like, this is it's about both really. You're with Apple. We're going to connect you into the tribe of creatives. So you're going to be in the same gang as John Lennon. That's the promise. It's a crazy promise, but that's what they're doing, and it works.
Clearly, not everybody in mankind, or humankind, I should say, is a maverick.
Yeah.
In fact, a lot of people are very normal and don't want to take a lot of risks. Is it the aspiration that sort of is the thing that drives a larger number of people to connect with that story?
Well, I don't think you can separate out. So there are two big promises that you can make with storytelling to connect with identity. One is connection.
Yeah.
So we're going to connect. You're going to have a tribal identity if you use our product, use our service, vote for our political party. And then there's also status, which is a separate thing. So you're not just going to join this tribe, this identity tribe. You're going to be like a high status version of that. So there are two different things that are kind of going on there. And I think often with business, they're actually offering status. It's saying, we see you, we see the kind of person you are, but we also see the kind of person you want to be. And if you use our product, this is going to be you. If your values are organic produce, then shop at Whole Foods, and you can. One of the things, I think one of the fundamental things to understand about humans is that we are an ape. We're not like an ape, we are an ape. We're one of 5 existing species of great ape. But obviously we're very different to gorillas and bonobos and orangutans and so on. And the difference is that we are part ape, part ant. So we're highly cooperative, we're highly collaborative. We don't solve the problems of life as individuals.
Right.
We solve them as like ants do. We gather into these highly cooperative superorganisms, and it's the superorganism that solves the problem, not the individual. So that's a company, that's a political party, that's a religion, that's a cult, that's a football team. That's just how we do it. That's how we've taken over the world. Now, in order to connect those individual human brains together, you have to have story, and that's what story is for. That's what stories evolved to be. It's a device for fusing individual human brains together, get them all focusing on the same goal, get them all figuring out the same obstacle, get them all having a shared understanding of who ought to do what and what's good and what's bad. That's story, and that's what story is for. So that's why story has to offer those two things. Story wants to get you connected into these cooperative groups, and it wants you to be useful to those groups. Mm. So that's the status part. When people are useful to our group, we raise them in status, and when we raise them in status, they tend to get rewarded. And that's true of hunter-gatherer groups tens of thousands of years ago. It's true of every corporation that exists today. With status comes prizes. So it's a kind of fundamental rule that the brain has: go for status, go for connection, go for status. And if you go for those two things, your life's going to turn out pretty good.
Do you think that there's a little bit of a challenge because that requires quite a lot of striving?
Yeah.
Right? And I can imagine there's quite a few people for whom status anxiety is a thing as well. So is it always good that we're wired that way?
Well, no, definitely not. So it's not. I sort of resist trying to put a moral framework on it because it's not an or, it's an is. This is just how it is. And of course, you can say, well, every human group is a status game, and that's true of Amnesty International. That's a status game. People compete for status, to be the best employee of Amnesty, to do the best work, to help the most people, and that's wonderful. But the Nazi Party was a status game too. So it's like, it's kind of. It's the best of us, it's the worst of us. It is us, this stuff, So I kind of resist trying to, it's a complex system, and it has a complex series of, trade-offs and results. So you can't really say whether it's good or bad. Just like you can't really say, is capitalism good or bad? Well, it is both,
Yeah, interesting. another part of the book is actually, so there's a lot in here that will be quite helpful to all of you in terms of practically how do I tell a better story than I'm currently able to do. I'm never going to be able to cover all the things in it, but I did pick out 3 things that I wanted to talk to you about. The first one is you talk about atomic statements. So these are things that make a story better, so have it penetrate more and connect with more people. One of them is atomic statements. So make America great again, take back control. What is it about those atomic statements that makes them so powerful?
Well, I came up with this idea of atomic statements when I was looking at the history of storytelling. And what was interesting to me was that before people could read and had access to books, the great religion spread, partly with storytelling, but mostly with aphorisms. So, the early religions spread with people saying things like, it's easier for a camel to get through the eye of a needle from through, that kind of thing. And so, so why is that? Well, these are kind of really short, clear, information-dense statements that are easy to remember and, importantly, easy to spread. So people weren't, the early Christians weren't going around reciting the New Testament to each other. They didn't have access to that stuff. It was aphorisms. It was Jesus says this, Jesus says that. And it's the same with Islam and, all the other religions. It's the same with Buddhism. It's the same with Confucianism. So aphorisms are a bit like tweets. They're a bit like, an advertising kind of cell line. It's like treat other people how you want to be treated is like just do it, and it does what it says on the tin. It's the same stuff. So what I mean by an atomic statement is it's this dense statement that is so full of meaning that it kind of has this explosive reaction on contact with the human brain, like it's full of meaning. And so that's I kind of think it's adjacent to storytelling. Really, it's a very early form of storytelling, and it's really, really powerful. As you said, make America great again. That's an atomic statement. During the latter days of the recent Trump election campaign, they put out an ad saying Kamala Harris is for they, them, Trump is for you. And even the people that came up with that advertising campaign were astonished at the effect it had. It shifted the needle 2.7% just before the election. So massively successful because it was this atomic statement. People read that and a world of storytelling meaning, and heroes and villains and all that stuff bursts out of their brains. It's really, really successful. So these atomic statements are really, really powerful and a really good thing to be thinking about. They're not easy to hone, but they are extremely powerful.
I'm sure all the ad agency people, I know there are some in this room listening going, great, my clients are still going to pay me forevermore. The second one, you actually touched on it a little bit with heroes and villains.
Yeah.
So I read a while ago Joseph Campbell's Hero of a Thousand Faces.
Oh, well done. You finished it, did you?
It was tortuous. But I was kind of interested in because so many people that I know have said, look at this book. Yeah, and then when I picked up your book, it said, it's old-fashioned and out-of-date, outmoded.
Yeah.
And yet you are still talking about heroes and villains. So there's obviously bits of it that you think are relevant to the hero's journey and bits that are not. So I'm really curious about how you see that.
Well, The Hero with a Thousand Faces is unreadable, right? So I think most people have read it, have read Chris
is
Vogler.
Readable, by the way.
It's complete, it's so it's ridiculous, it's so mad. But people pick out the kind of 22, there's the hero's journey in its full, straight to 22 beats. And, fine, it's been successful, it's been influential, but it was written in the 1940s, and we've got, getting on for a century's worth of new understanding about how the brain works, why we tell stories. So even though I talk about heroes and villains, I don't really talk about the hero's journey because it's, I'm not, it's great, but it's completely outdated. I think it doesn't, the main thing is it doesn't take into account psychology. And I think a lot of these old storytelling models that don't understand human psychology because they didn't understand it when they were writing those things. And so back when Joseph Campbell was working, and as far back as Aristotle, the only way you had of figuring out how storytelling works is by getting all the good stories and comparing them, and then saying what have they got in common, and then you come up with a list where they do this, and then they do this, and then they do this, and now you've got a recipe, and that's what the hero's journey is. It's a recipe for telling a story, and of course sometimes that works, but a lot of the time it doesn't work. You end up with this kind of dead thing. So we know a lot more. We know, for example, that really storytelling, what we want to see is character change. Yeah. So, a person changing in character from the beginning to the end. And so there's not that much of that in a hero's journey. It's a lot about going out there and fighting monsters and coming back with prizes. Like I say, I'm not shitting on the hero's journey too much, but it's just old and it's outdated. And especially when I talk to advertising agencies, they're trying to wrestle with the hero's journey and they've got like a 30-second ad to make. It's kind of crazy. And it's the same with Maslow's hierarchy of needs. That's also a 1940s bit of psychological technology, and that's also completely outdated. Like we know a lot more now about human motivation and what humans want and how humans are designed.
On that section of sort of archetypes, there's the underdog story. You've also got the kind of people wanting to aspire to high status people. Obviously, an underdog, I assume, is not a high status person or is on a journey to be them.
They're on a journey, exactly right. Okay,
so what is it about an underdog that is, you think, powerful?
So one of the most important things a storyteller has to do is to create identification with the viewer, with the reader. So if we see a character that we identify with, we're in and we care, and we make that thing part of us. So for people who are caring about John Lennon, I think different campaign would have worked. Michael Jordan, oh my God. So the underdog is universally successful. I mean, you go all around the world, you look at African folklore and Southeast Asian folklore, it's full of underdog stories. And I think there's two main reasons for that. The first is that the underdog is universally identifiable. Everybody feels like an underdog. We are creatures that pursue goals and overcome obstacles, and that's life. There's obstacles and goals and obstacles and goals. So we feel like an underdog, especially when we're really striving out there in the world. It feels like, fuck, what am I going to do? Am I going to figure this out? So when we see an underdog on the screen or on the page, it feels like us. We immediately identify with that person, so it's good. The other thing is about status and how status works in human societies. So status is a reward for offering value to your group, to your cooperative superorganism. So that means it's offered. It's not demanded. If you go into a group and you demand high status, unless you're already in a kind of group that identifies with you, unless you're Taylor Swift walking into a room full of Swifties, that's not going to go very well for you. And that's universal. That's hunter-gatherer groups. There's lots of prohibitions against what they call big shot behaviour. Humans don't like that stuff because it breaks how the status game works. We offer you status, you do not demand it. And the other thing is that status is relative. So if somebody walks in the big I am, projecting that they feel like they're the highest status person in the room, that makes you feel diminished. And that annoys people. So that irritates people. So, I call them overdogs, really. If you're an overdog is not good. Underdog is good.
Okay. Yeah. So humble leaders better than...
Yeah, exactly. Humble leader. Yeah, so that's why you often get CEOs like, emphasizing how they were brought up on the wrong side of the tracks, or they struggled against this rival, or there's always an underdog story that you can find, even if you went to Eton. There's something you can find, which
I'm not sure David Cameron had an underdog story.
Well, he had a sick kid, there's always something. Yeah, there's always something. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. The third bit that I thought was really interesting was the if you can write a story that appeals to the subconscious, then it will have a deeper connection.
Yeah.
And I made an incorrect assumption. I thought that might be grounded in neuroscience, and you said it's actually not. It's grounded in psychology.
Yeah.
What is it about that I missed?
Oh, well, neuroscience isn't actually that developed to science at the moment. Okay. All it can really tell us is when somebody has this experience, there's more activity in this part of the brain. Okay. So it's kind of mapping the brain. So obviously it's useful and valuable, but it's actually not that. It doesn't tell us that much. So most of my work is really about psychology, evolutionary psychology, and so on. So, but I mean, neuroscience can tell us, that most of the kind of thinking that happens in the brain is subconscious, is unconscious. There's only a tiny sliver of what we're aware of. We're only actually consciously aware of a tiny sliver of the processing that's going on in the brain. But the subconscious stuff really, as I say, it's about those promises of connection and status. That's what we want. If you think about the best moments in your life, they're going to be, a lot of them are going to be about connection, moments of love with your friends, with your family, with your partner. You know, these are the greatest and most important moments of our lives. And likewise, some of your worst moments are going to be the loss of connection. So rejection, heartbreak, ostracization. These are universal human dreads. And it's the same with status. Some of your best moments are going to be when you got this contract, when you achieved this thing, you became CEO of whatever. And likewise, some of your worst moments are going to involve humiliation, which is the opposite of, it's the sudden taking away of status. So, you know, connection and status subconsciously are the two things that humans want actually often over their lives. You know, humans are crazy storytelling animals that will choose identity over their actual life. You know, when they go to war, when they commit a terrorist atrocity, you know, when they take up smoking. You know, like as I said right in the book, smoking. I took up smoking because it makes you about 8% cooler, knowing full well I was walking into an addictive, killing habit. You know, it's mad, it's crazy, but we all did it in the 90s. I don't know if you did it in the 90s, but we all did it in the 90s. You know, it's mad, it's bullshit, it's crazy, and you know, and smoking cigarettes only sort of started to fade out when the smokers were forced to go outside and smoke in the rain by the bins, and it wasn't cool anymore. Yeah.
Interesting. You said that you didn't want to go into morality and trust, but I do want to. I want to go into it a little bit because I think there are people who can tell great stories. We probably all know people who can tell great stories. I'm hoping not everybody has listened to a great story told by a criminal, but that actually happens a lot, right? And there's you know, one of the examples in the book is the Theranos story. We were talking about the Bitcoin story, and so these are compelling stories. But what is it about? Like, so how do you? Having studied it, is there things that we could do to avoid being duped by a storyteller?
Yeah, one of the main ones is due diligence. I mean, in the Theranos story, it was amazing because you've got Elizabeth Holmes walking in there telling everybody that she has created this new machine, the Edison, and it used to take 2 big vials of blood to do all the tests, and now she can do it with one finger, you know, one pinprick of blood, and that's amazing. And so people like the Walmart family, Rupert Murdoch, threw hundreds of millions of dollars at it. It was the biggest investment the Murdoch family ever made. No, Rupert Murdoch ever made outside his family of companies. You know, on his board of directors, bloody Henry Kissinger, the former director of the Centers of Disease Control. And the astonishing thing is none of them did any due diligence. They didn't do it. They didn't check that what she was saying was true. And some people did. Like Google Ventures wanted to invest in this, and they sent some guy down to Walmart to get a Theranos blood test, and he had 2 massive, great big things of blood taken out of his arm. So he's like, hang on a minute. So they didn't invest. So some people didn't. But it's astonishing that Rupert Murdoch, you know, like so that's why I love the Theranos story, because it shows you how powerful storytelling is. Some of the most smartest, most successful, most powerful people on earth, they just didn't give a shit about the due diligence. They just believed the story. And as I say in the book, you know, the machine was worth nothing because the machine didn't work, but the story was worth $9 billion. That's what they were valued at the peak of their powers, Theranos.
It's really interesting. And I know you haven't looked too much at Bitcoin, but it's very, very similar.
Yeah.
Like I think FTX had Sequoia as a shareholder, most successful VC, or arguably.
Yeah.
And yet they didn't know that the company hadn't separated the customer's cash from the company's cash, which is a basic, like as a regulated company like we are, that's 101 idiot-proof guide to starting a financial services company. So yeah, it's interesting.
The other thing with Bitcoin and you know that those kinds of things is that I did get involved with them a little bit for a while, and then I don't know if you on the sort of individual investor level, it's full of the stories about, you've got to get in with this coin because they're doing a secret deal with Apple, and you know they're all on YouTube telling these fucking stories, and you very quickly realise it's all bullshit, like it's all nonsense. And I had sort of lunch with my brother-in-law about a year ago, and he was full of, you've got to get in with this coin that's launching next week because it's always Apple partnering with them, and I just thought, oh no, this is a nightmare. So a lot of that is story driven. It's that, you know, it runs on these kind of gossipy stories flying around and convincing people that this particularly new coin is the one to invest in because it's going to go up 8,000% when this announcement's going to be made next week, so you need to do it now. You know, that's a lot of that going on.
So a lot of appealing to biases as well.
Yeah.
Another one that I think is interesting that I'd love your take on. I don't know how many of you have seen on LinkedIn somebody that you know who was humbled by something. Like, for me personally, it's like way up there, the most annoying thing in the universe. And yet these are often quite high status people who are doing that.
Yeah.
What is that about?
Well, obviously it's humble bragging, and there have been actual studies on humble bragging. And I remember reading one of them where the psychologist said that we imagine that our happiness is going to make other people happy. It's not true. Like, it's not true. So don't just So you shouldn't humble brag. And it's just a way of it's a way of being an overdog with the kind of very thin veneer of an underdog. Oh, right. You know, like who's ever been humbled by receiving an award? Nobody. It's the opposite. So yeah, there's a lot of that going on, and there is a lot of just the general thing of people are, and I'm sure I'm the same. When something good happens to you, you have a statusy achievement. You want to tell everybody, of course, because you want to get the rewards. But of course, in the telling, it gets people's backs up because status is relative, and you know, like So you know, humans are complex and complicated, and it just doesn't work. It doesn't work unless unless it's somebody that you really identify with and look up to. I mean, a lot of these dynamics flip completely, polarity, if you're in a status game with a particular person who you really want to emulate. So, you know, if Taylor Swift is talking about getting the rights to a master's back, all the Swifties are going to go, yeah, you go, Taylor. So that's when it kind of flips.
Interesting.
We kind of have a love-hate relationship with high-status people. So Elon Musk, for example, is one of the most loved and one of the most hated people in the world. That's kind of how high status works.
Actually, just connecting on that, because another thing that I wanted to ask you was about cultural differences. So in particular, and maybe if I tell you the story. So I was interviewing one of my shareholders, Tom Blomfield. He founded this company, Monzo, it's a digital bank.
Oh yeah, I'm on Monzo.
And so I was interviewing him as a kind of human of prosper, because we want to make some stories up. And he was telling me the story of how in this country, because he moved to San Francisco, I was like, why did you leave the UK? You're like a very well-known entrepreneur in the UK. And his answer was, in the UK, I said to people I wanted to start a bank, and they all said, oh, that'll never happen. No one's ever done that. Don't bother. You know, you've never run a bank. You won't be able to do it. You go to America and you say the exact same thing. I'm started a bank. They're like, wow, that's so cool. Like, really excited and optimistic. What is it about different cultures then, in terms of why do we delight in being the sort of cynical Brits and what, versus?
Well, I think it's about individualism. So I wrote a book called Selfie about Western individualism, and one of the experts that I interviewed told me quite memorably, said basically, Western individualism begins in Europe, and the further you go west, the more individualistic people become until you fall off the cliff into the Pacific Ocean. Right. That's basically how it works. So I just think Americans are just much more individualistic than us. They're much more like, yeah, you go. And then if you go into the kind of Scandinavian countries, it gets even worse with the kind of, you've got to just always be miserable and low status and a bit like apologetic about yourself. And
apologies to any Nordic people.
That's what they say. There's a whole, I forget, is it called Yank? There's even a phrase for it, Yank Larven or something, I forget. This kind of rule of way of being, which is never put yourself forward, never stand up. And of course, in collectivist cultures, there's even more like that, where in East Asia, spotlighting yourself is much more taboo than it would be over here. Right. Traditionally, so yeah. It's just there are cultural differences, and cultures are bound together by stories that tell us who we ought to be if you want to feel like a hero, and who we ought not to be. And there's differences. There's differences as you go around the world.
This one, I'm just going to talk about it just because it straddles the two things that Prosper events are about. So one sort of advances in the world, and the other your human self. AI, we've talked about. AI in storytelling. What do you see the impacts of technology on storytelling, both positive and negative potentially?
I mean, so AI is really, really rapidly becoming really good at storytelling. That's the scary thing. I wrote an essay on my Substack platform a couple of weeks ago where I started a Substack about 10 weeks ago, and I started to notice there were these essays that were going viral, like really popular essays. Right. And of course, if you're new on a platform, you want to go, what is it about these that's getting hundreds of, they call them restacks, and literally thousands of 15,000 likes and all these comments. And I sort of noticed there was a kind of a particular style to all these essays. And I was like, wow, it's like Substack has got this insider language, how fascinating. And then one of these platforms, I noticed they were still publishing 3 essays a week. And I was like, that's a lot of essays to be publishing a week. And then it suddenly hit me, oh, fucking hell, of course. They all read the same and they're all publishing. And then you look and they're not really names. Right. It's like platforms like Letters from Elle and Milk and Cookies. And there's no picture of a person. But so I wrote an essay about this, and you know, and I kind of I reverse engineered it. So I put one of these essays in, and I said to ChatGPT, first I said, is this AI? And it said, this is almost certainly entirely written by AI or mostly written by AI, and it gave me all the reasons. And then I said, can you give me the exact prompt that I would need in order to make this essay? And it gave me the prompt, and you could just literally just put that prompt in with a different subject. And it would just endlessly, and they were all exactly like these viral essays on Substack. So I wrote a whole essay about this. But as I said in the essay, the amazing thing to me isn't the fact that this is happening, because there's a whole generation of kids cheating on their homework. Of course, they're going to be cheating on Substack too. What amazes me is the popularity. Like, one of these Substackers has a verified tick, which means they've got hundreds of paid subscribers, which means they're making thousands of dollars minimum every month, just by putting in this, this prompt. So that was the thing that was chilling to me. I was even looking through the comments, and somebody was going, "Oh, this has made me cry over my coffee in Starbucks this morning." And then someone put, "You realise this is just a bunch of AI slop?" And they'd replied, "I don't care if it's AI; it's still good." And it's like, bloody hell! Like, so this is like a Rubicon crossed as far as I'm concerned. It's like, not only are people loving this stuff when it's being pointed out that it's AI, some of them at least are going, "I don't care, I enjoy it." So that's the kind of future. And as I wrote in the essay, I think the answer is to kind of lean into your humanity. I mean, and your individuality and your weirdness and your damage. It's like, the thing about the AI essays is they're kind of superficially good. You know, all they're doing is they're as people have said before, AI is just a giant plagiarism machine. It knows what people want to read, and it knows how to put it together. It knows how to do that. So of course people are going to like it. But it's like eating sweets. And it's always going to tend towards the average. It's always going to give you this average, sum of, the sum conclusion of 100,000 NVIDIA chips is what you're going to get. So how writers should respond is by leaning into their individuality, leaning into their weirdness. So I think there's that. And I also think the other thing is there's always going to be a status dynamic with AI and writing. Like, real human writers will always become something like a luxury good, like like a Fendi badge. Like, people are going to want to read novels by people. They're always going to want that. It's like how Kindle's never replaced these books. And everybody said, I remember everyone saying, "Oh, books are dead," and they weren't. And the same with AI storytelling. Sure, we're going to have a Jack Reacher style Hollywood blockbuster script written mostly by AI, because who gives a shit who writes those things? They're all formulaic anyway. But there's still going to be a huge, like an industry of people writing really interesting films, really interesting novels, hopefully really interesting non-fiction, because they've got this individual point of view, which I think that's the opposite of what AI does. Yeah. AI does the mass, the average, and individuals do individuals. So I think it's not over, but I think writers have got to. Yeah, I think it's over for the genre writers. Okay, they're going to struggle. The rom-com people and the Jack Reacher people. Yes. Yeah.
So the more formulaic.
Yeah, because that's what AI does. It does formula.
Yeah. But the weird people can sort of make artisanal cheese by day.
Victory for the weirdos. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Awesome. Right. Enough of us. You're much more interesting. There's a question over here.
I was wondering if you can speak a bit to societal stories and the things that we learned from grandma about where to go work, or work hard at school, go to a good university, get a good job, and that'll create good outcomes for you as an individual. Things where we're not getting told that story by an individual who's intentionally lying to us, but society where they may not have up-to-date information about what's going on, or where the promise doesn't live up to the delivery on those kinds of societal stories.
Like I think that's just a manifestation of we've evolved to be these highly cooperative apes, and that means going. Part of that is going for status, and so how do you do that in the world in which you're born? And we're all in this story world where it's you've got to study hard, you've got to go to university, you've got to get a job, you've got to, that's just like I don't particularly blame anybody for telling that story, because that's that's what we do. We fall for stories and we tell stories, and we use stories to try and figure out how to survive, how to exist, how to thrive. And so that's the dominant story in a market economy. And I would defend it in a way too, because in the 21st century, that is how we do good in the world. That we by working hard and striving and getting jobs and starting businesses, we create growth, we create value, we create comfort and security for each other. We pay taxes, we create vaccines. We do more good than any religion does, but by working hard. In a practical sense. I mean, as I write in the book, the Tesco's annual tax bill is £4.5 billion. That's a lot of tax. That's a lot of good Tesco is doing, but it never gets called out and celebrated because it's just a thing that happens. But that's how we do good these days. And so I would, even though it doesn't work out for a lot of people, of course, it's a story that I would kind of defend on those terms.
There's an interesting question there around the difference being the story that's told versus the reality, and is that where politics kind of plays? Politicians in there trying to bridge the gap between factual reality and the story that you were told about whether you go to this university and get a good job afterwards.
Yeah, I think studying this stuff has changed how I see politics in a way. Like, I used to write for The Guardian, very lefty, and now I'm kind of a bit more removed from it all, because it's like, you see that the story the left tells and the story the right tells, and actually I think they're both correct. The left say, the capitalist system is hard and it's brutal, and there's lots of people get chewed up and spat out by it, and we need to look after them, and that's true. But then the right say, yeah, but capitalism is freedom. It's rescued us from the king-peasant dynamic that happened before. Like he's increased the quality of life for everybody, and that's also true. So I think a lot of these political debates, it's not like, is one side right or is the other side right? It's like with the economy. Do we heavily tax wealth creators, or do we tax them less so they stay and create more wealth? I don't know. That's a really complicated question. And to me, it's not a moral question, really. It's a question of what works best. It's a technical question. But I think the problem with politics is it all becomes this moral question, this moral thing of, it's not who's right and who's wrong, it's who's good and who's bad. And I just feel like that's a shame, because a lot of these questions are, I don't know, they're technical. They're questions for economists to answer, and I don't know the answer. So yeah, that's how I start to see a lot of political debate. It's like even with Trump. I mean, I'm by no means a Trumpist, but like his whole thing about the tariffs, it's a theory. Is it going to work? Probably not. But exactly, like it's probably not going to work. But like he's not doing it because he's the devil. He's just got this crazy fucking idea about how he's going to make America great again, and it's probably going to be a disaster. But it's an idea. Like he's just trying to do something. So I feel that the politics is damaging because it is this very, very morally drenched story, and the politicians play into that. It's not about this politician fucked up. They had this idea, they promised this, and this is the result. They're a bad person, they're evil, and that's the problem. I think that's what's unhelpful.
The comment about Trump leads me to the second question about the kind of what happens after the story that's told, and then the comeuppance that comes to the villain that you mentioned in your first sentence.
Well, I mean,
question about
yeah,
that.
I mean that's what we want as storytellers. We want comeuppance, and you see that especially in American politics with the kind of lawfare, with they're constantly using the legal system to try and imprison each other, and and we're going to lock Hillary up, we're going to lock Trump up. I mean, it's that's part of that whole storytelling stuff. People really want to see the monster destroyed.
When you talk about the story and the story being a deal, and sort of how do we turn that into positive? Because so many of the stories that gain the news, if you like, are often more negative.
Yeah.
And we know that we as humans are going to be more productive, we're going to be happier if we get good stories. How can is there a way that we as a sort of group of people, a nation, can actually tell more good stories so people are more hopeful, more positive, more... is there a way we can do that to make people feel better, to drive our communities more and our economy, etc.?
Yeah, definitely. But it's hard because you're dealing with gatekeepers, and as you say, negative stories. You know, I've lived through this as a journalist, where outrage has become the thing. You know, when I started as a journalist in the early 2000s, people were still talking about balance and is it fair, but now it's about the click. And so that's the economy of journalism now. So moral outrage, you know, it sells. So it's very hard to, you know, get those kind of positive stories across. And you know, and I feel the same way about politics. Like every time a government, Labour leave or the Tories leave, they'll have done some good stuff, but we never hear about that ever. All we ever hear is it's been a disaster. They did this and they did that and they did the other. You only ever hear about the good stuff when the other party want to get rid of it, and they go, they want to get rid of this thing, but it was amazing. And it's like, well, you never told us the amazing part. So it is frustrating. The one thing I'd say about political stories being positive is that those are the stories that do convince people. So when politicians offer a brighter future, and I think the left can get much better at that. For some reason, the right seem to be much better instinctively at using storytelling and emotion to convince people, where the left tend to go to facts and data a bit more, which doesn't work so well. And so Obama did a good job with Hope, and you know, Tony Blair with New Labour, New Britain. But when Keir Starmer got in, you know, for the first 3 months, their storytelling was appalling. It was negative, obsessing over this black hole and how awful the Tories were. People don't want to hear it. You know, it's just like, all right, I don't care if it's true or not. Just tell me how you're going to make my life better. But they just didn't get it. It's getting a bit better because they've got some good news. You know, yeah. So that's good. But it is hard, and people still don't, like, even, you know, at the top level of government, they still don't understand the importance of storytelling. You know. As just a normal voter, it frustrates you when you hear them obsessing over doing the other party down. Like, I don't care about your stupid battle with the opposite party. Tell me what you're doing, and you know, yeah, exactly. You know, yeah. So yeah. I think leaders can do a lot better about telling positive stories. But I also think the world of journalism is at fault for because they don't actually inform. Like, I always remember Jeremy Paxman saying, he goes into every interview with a politician saying, "What's the bastard lying to me about now?" And it's like, that's not good. Because what if they're telling you the truth? You know, like that's not informing people. That's just, you're going in there with this incredibly aggressive attitude and this presumption that they're lying. But they might not be lying. Like, guess what? Some politicians go into politics because they really want to change the world, because they're good people. Amazing, isn't it? But like, you never hear that story, and they're always painted to be these terrible people. And I think there are terrible people in politics, but I think there are a lot of good people on the left and on the right who sincerely believe that if they get to try out their idea, things are going to get better. So but they're not presented to us in that way, you know, which I think is a shame.
As an entrepreneur, you're often told that you need to tell a compelling founding story.
Yeah.
You know, what was the personal trauma you went through in order to give you the idea to found the business?
Yeah.
And then often under interrogation, it turns out those stories, if not completely untrue, are quite embellished.
Yes.
So what's your advice on the balance between something which is memorable and compelling versus something which is true under interrogation?
I think you've always got to go for the authenticity, because you're going to get found out, especially if a company becomes really successful. You're going to get found out, and it's going to become embarrassing, and it's going to become a reputational issue. So, and as I say, like, if you're creative, you can always think of some good story to tell about why you want to kind of found your business. I mean, businesses work because they're solving problems, essentially. So even on that level, like, people are suffering because of X, Y, and Z, or they're not maximally enjoying their lives because of X, Y, and Z, and I want to solve that problem. Like, even starting there is better than making up, I was in a garage and I had no money and I had leukemia and, you know, all that stuff, you know, it's just a bad idea.
I was going to ask about just generational change and the fact that young people are now conversing with emojis and YouTube shorts, and does that mean that the art of storytelling is becoming more get to the point or simplistic, and what are the implications there?
It's definitely getting more get to the point. Like, it's speeding up. Like, people are much more story hungry now. Like, if you read the Charles Dickens novel, that used to be Big Brother. That used to be like mass market pop culture Charles Dickens, and now it's really hard to read because it's like, get on with it, dude. You spent 3 pages describing a street in London, you know, so yeah, like, and that's not just a recent thing. I just think it's been accelerating. as storytelling, you know, as we become watchers of films and TV programs, and now there's TikTok and YouTube where they try and grab your attention just on the thumbnail. So yeah, we're becoming more story hungry, and we're becoming less tolerant of kind of waiting. Which yeah, I think in a way it's a shame, but I also think it's something that will level out as people get older. Like I don't have TikTok, I'm 50, like I'm not interested in TikTok, and I think that's going to be true for lots of people as they get older. They're going to get more tolerance for and more patience and enjoy the feeling of reading something longer in a novel or a New Yorker piece. So yeah, like I don't think it's ever going to be the case. I hope that everybody, even 65-year-olds, going to cope with TikTok. I don't think that's the case.
I haven't actually read this book yet, but I've read some of the previous ones, like The Status Game. Okay. And that seems to be focused about sort of finding a group and being, familiar with that group. You become the most pure version of that group. But then this book seems to be, and you've mentioned it a few times, about individualism and so on. And it's quite an interesting contradiction. But it seems to be, as you enter a group and find status, you try and become the most pure version, but the person who prevails in that group and finds a status is the one that has the individual novelty about them. Look at Donald Trump. So there seems to be this sort of Rubicon effect, where it's only fine if it's within a certain degree of the pureness of that group. I don't know if that makes sense. I don't know if you've covered that. Or
So when we talk about individualism as a cultural thing, what we're talking about is the emphasis in the West is very much on the individual as the locus of change, as we sacralize the individual. That's why we came up with the idea of human rights, and we tell stories about individual heroes going out and fighting monsters, and that's our kind of storytelling. But it's not a binary thing. It's like it's just a shift in emphasis. So if you go to kind of East Asia, heroes are people that kind of aren't people that kind of go out there and do brave, amazing individual things. They kind of sacrifice for the group much more.
Collectivism also.
Yeah. So it's all about it's much more about the group. Like in the Status Game, as you might remember, I wrote about these studies that looked at the concept of face in Japan and China, and how that manifests in the context of the office. And they were saying, and these Japanese sociologists had written a paper explaining that if a member of a team in Japan is singled out for praise, rather than feeling proud like they would in the West, they feel ashamed. And so what they'll do is they'll deliberately do a bad job for the next few weeks in order to remove the stain of the individual praise and fit back in with the group again, which is a very different model of what a hero looks like. But how that kind of works together is there's still models of what a hero looks like. So in the West, we just have a slightly different version, which is much more about the individual. In East Asia, traditionally, it's been much more about the group, like serving the group.
It's funny you chose Japan. I just got back from there this morning, and I was thinking it's so weird how clean it is here, and it's a collectivism of it. I do have one more quick question, but it's just because it's actually more to do with the old book, and I'll probably never get a chance to ask it again. But there's sort of three forms of status: dominance, virtue, and success, I think.
Yeah.
But when I was reading it, I was thinking, well, there's like sort of health and beauty as well. But does that fall into? It doesn't seem to, I'm better than you because I'm a gorgeous model, or
I think there's a lot of status in the wellness world. It's who's got the best breakfast, who's thinnest, who's more beautiful, who's got the perfectly lit thing. There's a lot of status going on in the health and beauty world. But I think broadly, what we want is survival, connection, and status. So a lot of health is not about status; it's about survival. So of course, like I go to CrossFit, and as a middle-aged man, I always get you see the young people, the young men are always just too hot and have to take their t-shirts off and show their abs. It's really fucking annoying. Like, so that isn't about I'm so hot today. So yeah, that's it's pure status, and and for us middle-aged men, fucking annoying. So yeah. The health and wellness world is completely kind of dripping in kind of status dynamics. But also, as you indicate, status isn't the only thing humans want. We really want three things. We want to survive. We want to connect with other people. We want love and belongingness, and we also want status. So there's always those three things that are always going on in our brains. They're all big drives.
You talked about writing for an audience, and this is probably, I don't know how relevant it is to you given it's non-fiction, but what's your process for getting a sense for what your readers are going to be thinking as you're developing the book?
I don't know if I really think about that, to be honest, about what my readers are going to be thinking. No, I just sort of, I have the kind of idea that I want to kind of write about and then just find out about it.
So, for example, stand-up comedians...
I don't try and second guess what they want to hear, if that's...
Right.
Yeah.
If you had to distill down the essence of what makes a compelling, successful story, what would you say is the formula?
So if you're interested in persuasion, so it says, you have to achieve identification. So there has to be a way that the audience identifies with your protagonist or the problem they're in or some way of identifying. And then, those three things that we said all humans want. So all stories are about survival or connection or status or a combination of those things. So if you think about a film like The Revenant, that's a survival story. It's Leonardo DiCaprio being chased by a bear. It's pretty straightforward. If you think about Stand By Me or Brokeback Mountain, their connection stories are about love, friendship. Think about Barbie or Whiplash or 8 Mile, they're status stories. They're about status. And if you think about the stories that we really love and that really go down in history and last for centuries, so maybe like The Godfather or Romeo and Juliet or Star Wars, those stories are about survival and connection and status. Like they feel dense with fascinating information, those stories, because they're about the three great human themes. So I think that's fundamentally what good storytelling is about. It has to be about survival, connection, or status, and ideally more than one of those things. The more you can pack in of those three themes, the richer your story is going to feel. There are other things. So stories should be causal. So one scene should trigger the next and trigger the next, instead of having lots of what they call and then things. And this thing happened, and then this disconnected thing happens, and then this disconnected thing happens. So that's quite difficult. You find that a lot in kind of very kind of high literature and art house movies that get lots of awards but don't end up having big audiences because they're hard work. So causality is really important to storytelling. And there's the basic shape, crisis, struggle, resolution. Stories are fundamentally about obstacles and goals. And they generally, as I said, tend to be about obstacles to survival or connection and status. Those are the problems that protagonists have. So that story is shaped where something happens to challenge the protagonist's access to survival, connection, or status. The main body of the story is them struggling against that challenge, that obstacle, figuring out how to kind of solve the problem, and then the final scene is they win, and that's what a hero is. That's what you see at the end of. At the end of Star Wars, Luke Skywalker's gone from a moisture farm worker whose nickname was Wormy at school to this great hero celebrated with a big gold medal and everyone loves him. So these are the hero's rewards, survival, connection, and status. So that kind of in a nutshell, those are the kind of essential ingredients of a compelling story.
I was just curious what you consider when you're thinking about whether to tell a story, whether it's a good one or not. My husband has a wonderful ability at a dinner party to bring up, I was just at this inquest, and it is very powerful in its effect, but it really doesn't deliver necessarily the purpose of good storytelling. Yeah. I just wondered, do you have any advice for him?
Yeah, I think it's about looking at the reactions. Like there's something about having that ability to monitor people's emotional responses to your story. Like you can tell, it tells you a lot. And I think he needs to pay probably more attention to how people are feeding back, Read
the room. Read the room.
Yeah.
Awesome last question. Well done.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's been a great pleasure having you all here. Will is going to be signing books. If you would like yours signed, please do stick around. Otherwise, please congratulate Will for a great talk. Inspiring. Thank you. Thanks.